My name is Richard Dodds. I'm the curator of maritime history at the Calvert Marine Museum in Solomons, Maryland. I'm here today because several years ago, Senator Bernie Fowler contacted the Marine Museum about our interest in his archive, extensive archive here, and the preservation of that archive in Calvert County. So I'm here today, it's December 14th, 2014, to interview Bernie Fowler about his early life, starting from his birth in Baltimore to his early years growing up in Broomes Island, through his service in World War II in the United States Navy, and his return to Broomes Island and beyond. But we're here with Senator Bernie Fowler on the 12th of December, 2014. First off, we'll start with your parents. Bernie, tell me a little bit about your mother and father, names and where they hailed from.
My dad's name was Howard Andrew Fowler. He was born and raised in what they used to call Wallville. It's commonly known as St. Leonard's now. My mother's name was Clara Lillian Fowler. She was born on Broomes Island, the old home place right on Nan's Cove. And they were a good team. We were not in the upper echelon financially, but we had a family. We had a mother and father that loved us, cared very deeply for us, and both of them had very limited education. But they had big hearts, and they made no apology for loving their children.
Your mother, what was her maiden name?
Mother's name was Dove. Her maiden name was Dove.
And that was the family, the Dove family. It's on Broomes Island, still is?
Yes, they were all born and raised in Broomes Island. My grandfather may have been born up the county somewhere, but he soon moved to Broomes Island as a young man, and fell in love with Miss Emma, that was his wife, and they lived there happily ever after.
I believe soon after your parents married, they moved to Baltimore.
That's correct. I had an uncle who had, his parents were good enough to gift him some money when they died, and it was a pretty good sum of money. And he kept insisting on my dad coming to Baltimore. Said, you know, times are tough in the country. Once you come to Baltimore, we'll get a little business going up there, and you'll do better. You'll be able to provide better for your family. And his name was Arthur Kennitz, and Dad really thought highly of him. They were like brothers instead of brother-in-laws. And he and Mom packed up the kids and all, and went up on a steamboat to Baltimore. And we lived over on, I don't remember the numbers of the street, but I remember the street name was Grindall, Grindall, and that was over in East Baltimore. Had the little row houses and the little steps out front that washed every day, you know, unless it was a freezing cold day. Dad, to make a long story short, doesn't succeed quite as well as Uncle Arthur had projected. And not too long after that, they thought seriously about moving back. In the meantime, I was born in Baltimore, and they brought me back home as an infant baby. And we moved to the little house on Nan's Cove, and there's where I stayed until I went into service in World War II.
Now I know, Bernie, that's not your full name. You were born with a full name.
Yes, Clyde Bernard Fowler. That was my original name. But people I used to work for when I was in high school, from the time I was a freshman until I graduated as a senior, they started calling me Bernie, and then shortly everybody was calling me Bernie. And it got so nobody in the county knew Bernard or Clyde, so I was talking to Judge Boyne about it one time, and he said, look, why don't you slip Bernie in your regular name? Said, I can do that through the courts. It's very simple. It's done all the time. And then you can use that if you ever run for public office. So I did. I had them change that. It's Clyde Bernard Bernie Fowler. So I always went by in my public life as C.B. Bernie Fowler, which was legal and proper.
Okay. I've never heard anybody refer to you as Clyde Fowler. I know you had siblings. Can you tell me a little bit about your siblings? Your brothers?
Yes, we have 4 children. We have they range in age from the youngest. My son is 53.
I'm sorry, Bernie. I'm talking about your siblings.
My siblings. Okay. Yes. There was a total of 6 in our family. My sister died some years ago. She was the eldest in the family, and she was sort of the matriarch of the gang. Her name was Louise Fowler, and then she married a Navy officer and became Louise McGoy. Then my brother next to her, his name was Howard Andrew, named after my dad, Andrew Fowler Jr. And then there was Marvin next to him. He was 3 years older than I. And then myself. Then following me in 1928 was Edward, and in 1938 was Merrill. So there were a total of 6 of us, 5 boys and 1 girl. And it was a crowd in the little house we lived in, I can assure you.
And your father certainly had to provide for a large family. Very important, because your mother didn't work. She kept house.
Mother was always a housekeeper, except she was one of the better crabbers in the area. And in the summertime, when crabs were running, if we were out of school, I was sitting on the stern of the skiff with her. If not, she would go after she got the house straight and got everything ready. She'd go take the little skiff we tied up at grandmother's, and she'd crab around and catch soft crabs, and then they sold them. There was 2 markets for them at Broomes Island, and she sold them then. And at one time, the glut of crabs was so great they were only getting a penny apiece for them, 12 cents a dozen for soft-shell crabs. They wouldn't even buy the peelers and busters because there was too much mortality. They died too easily. Mm-hmm. There were so many of them in the live boxes, they called them, and floats, that the oxygen was soon depleted, and the little animals couldn't make it. So they wouldn't buy the ones that were sort of fatalistic, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So going back to your Baltimore days, your parents weren't there that long. Your family wasn't there that long. You were born there. But I understand actually you moved to Parker's Wharf when the family came back to the county. Is that correct?
Yes. Dad took a job with Mr. McNaney. That was one of the steamboat stops at Parker's Wharf, one of the regular stops for the steamboats. And Dad took a job with Mr. McNaney, who owned the McNaney Oyster House there. It was never the big operation that Warren Denton was at Broomes Island. It's probably like Lohr's at Solomon's. It was a good industry, so to speak, but it wasn't like Denton had 135 shuckers. At Parker's Wharf Oyster House, at McNaney's Oyster House, he probably never had more than a dozen shuckers at any one given time.
What did your father do for McNaney?
Daddy was sort of the manager. Mr. McNaney's absence was almost constant. So Dad was kind of there to watch the shuckers and to watch when the oysters came in and they bought the oysters. He would be on the dock to make sure that that was all taken care of properly. Not a very, I guess, pressing job as such. It was a very casual situation for him. But and the money he got was very minuscule. They didn't pay much money in those days, and it was times when Mom would kind of pitch in because she used to make all the gloves for the shuckers, the oyster gloves. They only had a glove on the right hand. On the left hand, no, I'm sorry, on the left hand they had the glove. On the right hand they just used on these 3 fingers, they used covers. She'd make those little covers, they'd slip those canvas covers over the fingers because that's where the shell, sometimes the knife would slip a little bit, and that's what they used them for, to protect their hands and their fingers. Yeah.
So your family lived at Parker's Wharf then for a few years?
We lived at Parker's Wharf for from the time we left Baltimore, and I can't give you my age at that time. I could guess it, probably 1 or 2 years old. And we lived there, and my first school days was at the one-room school at Island Creek. There were only 3 in the first grade. There were 4 siblings in the school. It was grades 1 through 7. And we were kind of scattered, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it was at that time. My sister graduated, I think, 3 years ahead of me, so that would make it about right. But we lived there until about halfway through the first year. I was 5 years old then. But halfway through the first year, Dad decided to go back to the water and to go back farming. So we went to a place called, it was the Wells Farm. It still exists, Mr. Joe Wells. And he was sort of the tenant farmer. Then he also had a little boat down at the second farm that he'd go and use to catch oysters and stuff like that. The water industry was in his blood, but you did what you had to do to make a living. And it was, you know, the Depression started in 1929. Depression had just begun when I started my first year in school. It was a very challenging time for everybody. But the culture of the people was so different then because, you know, if you needed to put shingles on your house, your neighbors come over and help you. It wasn't a big deal. If somebody's barn blew down or was destroyed for some reason, everybody would get together and help them raise that barn. If you needed to get your boat out of the water, we talk, some of these are log canoes, you know, it might be as much as 32, 34 feet long. They would get them up on skid poles so that you could clean the barnacles off them, copper them, you know, the usual thing you do with marine equipment. But it was so different then, and you know, the little island was about 150 homes, but there were about 5 or 6 stores, grocery stores there, and they sold gumboots, they sold hats, they sold shoes, everything you could. It was a one-stop shop. And the system was this. It was an honor system. They had what they call a tick. They had a little book with a carbon copy in it. And everybody, when the river would freeze up and you couldn't make any money, they would carry them all went along on that tick, they called it, put it on ticket. Then in the spring, when the fishing started and the monies began to evolve, then they'd pay the store bill. But that's the way it worked, and it was a very, very trustworthy way to do business. And if you didn't pay Mr. Denton, don't go to Mr. Pitcher's to expect good credit, because they didn't have computers in those days, but they had a system to let you know who the deadbeats were. So for the most part, they honored their bills, and they paid their bills when they got the money. And that's the way we lived. Gosh, to get a nickel, 5 cents, would be, you know, like today would be like a $1,000 bill.
Like a windfall.
Which, oh yeah, windfall is right. But
where was the Wells Farm, Bernie?
Wells Farm was at as you go to Parker's Wharf, right down the end of the road is where the oyster house was, right on the river. About halfway from 264, that's the Broomes Island Road, to the end of Parker's Wharf Road, about midway. There's a dirt road to the right and goes down. So far it's still in agriculture. I don't know whether it's in the agricultural preservation or not, but I'm surprised by now that somebody hadn't bought it up and built homes on it. So I suspect whoever owned the property put it in ag preservation, which was a good thing for them to do and a great thing for the county.
So then if I get this right, after your father left the McNaney place at Parker's Wharf, then the family moved to Broomes Island.
Moved back to Broomes Island in the cottage, and I was of the impression that Dad owned the cottage, but I've been corrected since, and my sister told me we never owned the home. That house was owned by my uncle, Josh Dove, and he let our family move into it.
Where was the house located, though?
The house was located just as you go on the island. You know where the public landing is there, where you can put a boat overboard, stuff like that? If you look diagonally from that little foot wharf there over, you'll see a gray house there. I've got a picture on the wall here. I'll show you after we break. And that's where we live. The house does not look the same today as it did then. It was very small. 4 of us slept in one room. My 3 brothers and sisters. My sister had a bed over here, and the 3 boys slept in a big double bed the other side. And it was a very tight situation. But then you have to do what you have to do, and that's the way life was in those days. And
I imagine it was a fairly, as you were saying earlier, a very simple life. Did you even have central heating in the house at the time?
Oh, we never had electricity. We never had any running water. You went to the pitcher pump, which was a handle on it, and you'd put water in it and catch it, so the water would come up, and that you'd get your water. And a lot of people had to dug wells where they just, dropped a bucket down the well, or they'd have a wheel on the top with a bucket on it, let it down, get water. But you'd say, my, what hardships that was, but we didn't consider it a hardship because we didn't know any better. That's the way life was.
Everybody else was.
Everybody was in the same boat. You had no oil heaters, you had no central heating. It just wasn't there. So everything was wood and coal. And that's one of the things the boys grew up doing, was cutting the wood, splitting the kindling wood so you'd have it to make fire the next morning when you're in the wintertime when it was cold. But it was not we never considered a hardship, or why is this happening to me? Because we didn't know any better. We did not know any better. So we accepted this is the way life is, and you go with it. And again, repeating myself, the one thing that we had was a togetherness in the family and a togetherness in the community that has long ago evaporated to what it used to be. But, when you had someone sick in the house, the whole community knew about it. And if you went out to the door to one, how's so-and-so doing today? Doing any better? Oh, I'm glad he's doing better, and stuff like that. It was just a friendly time to be alive, a time where you didn't have to worry about anybody robbing you or breaking in your house. That was unheard of. I don't remember in my young life except only one murder that ever happened in Calvert County for years. And that's the way life was in those days, and that's the way people's minds were in those days. They didn't have a angry attitude, or because I don't have this, I'm going to take it from somebody else. No, this is the way you're intended to live. This is it, and you do the best you can. And that's what people did. Mm-hmm. Didn't complain either. People didn't complain those days. Now, if somebody's in the room and making a little noise and another child can't hear the TV, you get a little fiasco because we didn't have to worry about it. Didn't have TV. Didn't even have radios then. We didn't have an automobile. So those things were they were bonuses for those who had the money to get it. I counted one time years ago, I did a complete windshield survey at Broomes Island. I was counting the oyster boats, that actually active boats that worked out at Broomes Island, and also the automobiles. And I got up to about 8 automobiles on the island. If you wanted to go somewhere, you had to get Uncle Johnny or Uncle Harvey or somebody to take you that had a car. And going to the doctors was unheard of. Doctors made house calls then. And then if you didn't have a phone, you'd go to the neighbor's home because the phones weren't that prevalent either. You'd go and then you'd crank the phone and you'd get a hold of the doctor. And that may be 9 o'clock in the morning, and he may come trudging in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But they were consistent and they were persistent. There was a dedication, an affection for their patients. I can remember old Doc Williams. My gosh, the house calls that man had. And he was the first one I know of in the southern Maryland area that had a telephone in his car. And, he could do that because he could call the hospital or he could call his office to see if there's any calls come in. So if it was in an area where there was another patient to see, he'd save time. And that was about a 3-page story in the Baltimore paper in the old brown copies of the paper, you remember those? Yeah. And, but gosh, life was so simple then. So simple.
Let me go back to your early education. You started at the one-room school.
The school, after it ceased to be used as an educational facility, it reverted back to the county commissioners. The county commissioners then could sell it, and they sold that to a fellow by the name of Norris Hardesty, who opened up a little grocery store and a beer joint there, added on to it, and then it subsequently caught on fire, burned down one time.
So then you continued your education down at Broomes Island?
I went from 1 to 7 grades at Broomes Island. Those days we had no middle school or junior high, and you started school at the first grade, no kindergarten, and you went 7 grades in elementary school, and you graduated from elementary school with a diploma. It was as big a deal as graduating from high school, because in those days there were very few boys ever went to high school down there in the early days. In fact, a friend of mine who's dead now, Herbert Buckmaster, myself, were the first 2 boys ever to graduate from Broomes Island, from high school.
That's remarkable.
And we graduated in 1940, before you were born, but it gives you a little identity with the period of time, First graduating class in Calvert County was when I was born in 1924. But then it was only for those, there was no school buses. It was only for those who could get, the father may have a car, they could find transportation to get up to, they had a library. It became a library later on in Prince Frederick, but that, I'm told, served as the first high school in Calvert County. Just a little one-room building.
But tell me about the school in Broomes Island. At the time, there was a one-room school there as well?
No, it was a 2-room school, and the first school that I went to, the second half of my first year in school, was up adjacent to the Broomes Island Cemetery. It was an old building, obviously no insulation, and it wasn't finished off too well inside. No water. Boys had to go to the spring, get the water, and bring back. Go in the woods and get the water, get the wood, so the teacher would have wood for the fire the next day. That was seven grades. There was 1, 2, 3 in the one room, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the other room. And when I was in the 3rd grade, they built the new 2-room school at Broomes Island, which still exists. And the community has that now as a civic center, and they're doing a good job with it. A lot of good memories there. Had good teachers. We only had 2 teachers. Had one teacher in the one room that taught 3 grades, and Miss Grace Dorsey in the other room who taught the 4 grades. You graduated from there, you got your diploma, like I said, and you dressed up in a blue, white pants with a blue tie, white shirt, and you got a little old diploma all rolled up with a ribbon on it. that was, for the most part, the end of many of their educations. But
were you a good student?
I was fair. I was good in my early days in school because I remember the first part of my school year in the first grade at Island Creek, the one-room school at Island Creek. There was a Miss Ireland. She later got married to a Mr. Gray. But when I went in that school that day, I was a little apprehensive. You know, you're 5 years old, although you've got your other 3 siblings with you. You still don't feel quite comfortable. And she got a hold of me and my hand and walked me over me and showed me where I was to sit at. She had me sit right up in the front seat there. There was 2 other students behind me. And penmanship was a very big part of it then. Penmanship. You got these we call them scratch pads now. They had the double lines in them. And you would have to make your capital A's up here. Then below you'd have to make your little a, or vice versa. And all through that first half a year of school, every paper that I did got a VG in red on and got hung up on the board. Should show the students, now this is the way I want you to do it. You don't pay any attention to it, but I look back over it, and that was a very flattering time for me. All I didn't have sense enough to be flattered, you know. And reading, writing, and arithmetic. I think by the time I was in the 3rd grade, we had to know our multiplication tables up to 12, 1 through 12. I don't think they even teach them anymore. It's all, you know, they use the new technology, little calculators and stuff. Like they're allowed to use the calculators now when they take a test. You do square root on them. We had to do all of that, you know.
Were there any teachers you remember that were quite an influence on you when you were growing up, or any other adults?
Oh, yeah, there's a number of people. Miss Ireland made me love school the first day I walked in that door. And when I got older in the upper classes, a lot of times you'd be called out of school because if a oyster bar opened up and a lot of oysters out there to be caught, you know, you could load the boat with oysters. It took every able body you could get, so I'd get out of school occasionally and help the family. And it was a life that I don't think I'd necessarily want to go over it again, but I wouldn't trade the experience that I had. And I think that kind of culture builds you into manhood. It builds you into independent. Not that you're the kingpin or anything, but you learn to do things on your own. You don't expect somebody to do something for you the rest of your life. There were no handouts in those days. And the handouts they had during the Depression, my parents wouldn't let us take them. You could get a pair of shoes if you wanted them, but we weren't allowed to. We were not allowed to accept poverty. That was the pride, whether it was false or not. Use your own judgment, but we were taught, no, we're going to make it on our own. And now it's a different interpretation altogether.
As you got into the upper classes, you during the summer recess, summer holiday, did you required, or did you work, or what did you do during that summer?
Well, all during elementary school, yes, I either crabbed. Dad would take the boys out on the flats. My sister would stay home with my mother, and they would take care of the housework, because in those days there were no washing machines. They did all the washing outside under the shade of a tree. They'd boil the water on the cook stove in the kitchen and take it out and put it in the tub, bucket by bucket. And but we would crab. The boys would get on the flats, unless it was windy and you couldn't see the bottom. If it was a little windy and too many ripples, you couldn't see the bottoms. Because when you're wading like that, your eyes are pretty close to the crabs. And if you're up on a boat looking down, you could see much easier. But we would crab from there up to a place called Battle Creek. You know where that's at. And that would be, by that time, the tide would have turned and we'd come on back. each one of us, Dad made a live box for each one of us. You tied it around your waist, and that's what you did. You'd be abreast of each other. The oldest one would be on the outside, and oh man, that was fun when you'd hit a spot that nobody had been to that day, and you could catch a crab here and look down about 15 feet in front of you, see another old soft shell sitting by his shed there. It was a fun time.
So you were actually contributing to family income, though, too.
Oh yes,
yeah, very much.
Yes. And in those days, the children's income wasn't theirs. That money, this sounds strange, but I never kept any of the money that I made when I was a child. That went into the family pool to help pay the bills and keep things going. I never will forget when I first went to Washington. I went to school at the Washington Navy Yard up there, and college was out of the question. And my stipend that they paid you. You had to work. At the same time, you had the schools mostly in draft and orthographic projection stuff like engineering stuff. And when I got my paycheck at the end of the week, it was $15.44. They paid you 40 cents an hour. That's $3.20 a day, but my take-home pay was $15.44. It cost me $5 for my room and board, and it cost me $5 for my room, and I only got my breakfast. Then I had to buy a meal ticket with $5. You got $6 worth of food for $5. You buy a meal ticket, it lasted the rest of the week. Then I had $5 left. I would hitch home on the weekend and give Mother half of that money.
Different life.
And she took it.
Before we go off the subject of schools, schools obviously at that time were very much segregated. Was there any interaction between you young people, white people, and young black people at that time?
Oh, yes, indeed. When I went to Island Creek School, there was a school that's still there. What are they using it for now? I think the police are using it now. They put a newer school there, but it was the old pink schoolhouse, they called it. It was painted pink. Old wooden, shabby building. Half the glass is out in it, a window glass. And the blacks would come up early, and we'd all get together out there in the yard, the older boys in particular. Most of the time I was watching them. And they'd play dodgeball, they'd play fox and hounds was one of the favorites. And the blacks and the whites mingled and played together. But when Miss Ireland came out and rang that bell, cling, 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 that meant you had to stop, get in that school, and don't hesitate because you'd get good tongue lashing if you did. Then the black boys and girls would go on off to the pink schoolhouse, which was about a mile from where our school was at Island Creek. They would go on off. So yes, there was intermingling. There was, and it was done in a very friendly way. We didn't feel estranged. We didn't feel like, well, you can't touch these. But they were our friends. We were their friends. But when that bell rang, boom, it was two different worlds.
Interesting. Going back to Broomes Island again, you're growing up there. I can see where you started very early your interest in the river and what the life in the river, because you were helping your father, you were crabbing. Is that correct to say that that's where you first started your love for the Patuxent River, your interest in the river?
I really think it was, and one of the things, recreation was you choose up sides, and sometimes you play a little ball with a rag ball one the parents would make. We later on got sophisticated, got some hard balls, started playing baseball, but you got so involved in swimming. That was a daily recreation, and the water was so clear and clean then. You had sea levels, had plenty of sea levels, particularly the hot weather when the salinity was up. But yes, you're right on target. I think that it's almost like the Patuxent River water gets in your blood, and it stays with you. You never get rid of it. I've often heard some of the old timers say, once you get that oyster mud on you, you'll never leave it, you know. But that's when I fell in love with the river, and that love, I don't think has drained much over the years. I've had a lot of disappointments, but I've still tried to keep my optimism up, and I'm not totally discouraged. Unhappy sometimes, and disappointed on many occasions, but never give up, you know.
I've heard that one before. Switching a little bit then to, I know you're quite religious and very faithful. Was your family, you grew up in that sort of religious background with your family, or was that something that happened later on in life? Or?
No, as a boy, Dad went to Watershed Memorial Church. And I never knew, he never talked to me about it, but he very rarely ever went to Broomes Island Church. Made sure that we were out the door on Sunday mornings to go to Sunday school and church. And so did Mother. Now, Mother very seldom went too, because they were two peas in a pod. And, you know, it was sort of, well, if my husband's not going, I'm not going to go either. So while there was prayer in the house, and Mother, I hardly recall a time when she didn't take time to read her Bible some. And that gave me good vibrations, you know, to kind of build a foundation on. But we were taught at home much by our parents, particularly my mother. Because I remember one time she said, you know, I was thinking about quitting school because my uncle wanted me to haul seine with him. And it was enticing because his children were my cousins, and we all recreated together. We were good friends, and it's kind of fun to get out there with them on the water and spend the weekend over on the bay and that sort of thing. And Mom said to me one time, she said, you know, I pray for you that I want at least one of my boys to graduate from high school. And said, I hope you'll change your mind. I hope you won't quit school. And that stimulated me, and I never knowingly disobeyed my mother in my life, or my father. Dad was, he had a heart as big as a giraffe, but he could be rough when he wanted to be rough.
It sounds like your mother particularly, and her Bible readings at home.
Yes.
Certainly started your interest, but was there anything later in life that increased your faith or changed in some way, or did you just sort of continue that trend?
Richard, every year at Broomes Island, the church at that time was known as the Broomes Island Pilgrim Holiness Church. It had Methodist leanings. It is now the Broomes Island Wesleyan Church, which is very close to the Methodism. But that church every year in the fall, late fall, like in November, and again in the spring of the year, they'd have revivals, they called it. And they'd have visiting evangelists and entertainers come. By entertainers, I mean these were talented people who had good voices, good singers, and they usually played a guitar. Sometimes they'd have an accordion or play the piano. And believe it or not, that was a real attraction in those days. It was, I don't want to compare religion to a circus, but when a circus used to come to town, all the kids would run out and watch this old pipe organ coming down, getting ready to set up shop for the circus. Not comparing the church to circus, but it was a real attraction. You didn't have to drive people there. That was, remember, there's no entertainment at home except the family conversation. There's no radios, there's no TVs. So what do? You do the best thing you have. And at that time, the evangelistic services were very good. And they had some good preachers came in and had some great talent. A lot of them I remember. And I recall back in 1938, I was a sophomore in high school, and was in church, and this evangelist, his name was the Reverend P. F. Elliott. Actually, he had worked for the FBI for a while, and then he said in his sermons from time to time that God had called him to be an evangelist, and he felt that's what he wanted to do, and he was a very good one. And he always brought good entertainers with him. I remember he had one lady by the name of Marie Holmes, and she played the guitar and sang, and oh man, if Nashville got a hold of her, she'd not have got away. I mean, she had a beautiful voice. But the entertainment was so good, and I remember this one service in 1938 in November that she had sang a couple of songs, and then the minister started preaching. I'm not even sure I remember the sermon too much, but at any rate, something got me that night, and I believe truly it was the Holy Spirit. And we'd gone because we used to sit with the girls we went to school with. We'd all sit in a pew together, you know, the boys. And that night, when the evangelist gave the altar call, it was just like somebody yanked me out of the pew. And I went up and knelt at the altar. Now, a 14-year-old child hasn't had too much time to do many bad things because there wasn't, you know, no such thing as drugs. You know, Coke was a Coca-Cola that you drank in those days. And I went up and I just asked God to forgive me for any sins I'd committed, knowingly, unknowingly, and that this is for real. I do believe there's a God. And I went through the whole prayer and gave my life to the Lord. Now, I've told this story many times, but I've also been quick to say, I've been as imperfect as everybody else, and there's no perfect person. We are all, you, Mike, we're all sin, sometimes unknowingly. Your wrath will get to you, anger, you'll say something you feel sorry for saying, or you'll do something that's wrong. Not real bad stuff, but I mean, there are times when you do these little things unknowingly. So to me, there's no, I don't know of any saints walking around in the United States of America, but it's an ongoing challenge to try to do God's will. And one of the things that is the most helpful thing that I've found is to make sure that you take time every day to read the Scripture. And I like to take time, like if my wife's off somewhere, I'll go in the living room. That's my favorite place, and sit in that chair where I can see the family, my dad, grandfather, my son. And I'll just lay back and kind of meditate. And occasionally I'll say, and this is Scripture, Dear Lord, speak, your servant is waiting. Actually waiting for God to say something to me. Now, I have to be honest with you, I've never had God openly converse with me like I've heard people, God told me this, and God told me that. Well, I have been led by God to do certain things. There's the chemistry that takes over in your body that you know in your heart it's the right thing to do. You ought to do it, and you never regret doing it. And that is kind of sanctimonious logistics here, but that's what I've tried to do. And yet I've been wild and woolly at times in my young life in the Navy, and whether you're going to get back home or not, get a few extra beers in you, which I shouldn't have drank to start with, but I did. But like I say, it's just a matter of constant cultivation and constant affection, respect and honor for deity that drives me. I hope that's what drives me. At least I interpret it as being that.
Thank you, Bernie. Just going back now to Broomes Island again. Your children your age, when you were about getting ready to graduate from high school, graduate from elementary school there. The boys particularly, they were almost all ordained already to follow their fathers on the water. And most of them did that, and that was the normal life. But you, thanks to your mother, it sounds like, went to high school. As you said, you were one of the first two boys from Broomes Island to go to high school. That must have been quite a major step in your life.
Well, at that time, I didn't think it was too important, and I didn't think it was such a gigantic step. But looking back over it, I know that it was the formulation of my future. Had I not gone on to high school, and I've taken a number of college courses. I have honorary degrees. I've got a doctorate from St. Mary's, one from College of Southern Maryland, another one in Macon I'm not allowed to say anything about. But it was that basic education, and you did get a good education in high school in those days. Contrary to popular belief, because there was no technology, there was no this and none of that. But you were full force into whatever you were doing. If you were in an algebra class, that's where you were. Your mind wasn't floating somewhere else, because your algebra teacher would keep you on your toes. And they had time to be personal then. The schools weren't overcrowded. The rooms weren't overcrowded. You didn't have 35 kids in a classroom with one teacher. So I think my high school, in a way, was really probably as helpful to me and to most people as maybe a small 4-year liberal arts college would have been, because that's the way they trained you. And your mind was mechanized, because you had to learn your multiplication tables. You had to do the square root. You couldn't take a calculator and push a couple buttons and get it. And I think that kind of sensitizes your brain, and I think that it helps your brain to grow and to develop, and it kind of nurtures you into a mode of intellect that helps you compete with people of all levels of education. And
your parents must have been very proud, obviously, that when you graduated from high school. That was a major thing back then.
Oh yeah, they were. Mom cried that night. I have to tell you a little story about that, though. See, in those days, it wasn't a big deal. Like, they didn't have a big prom and all the fancy gowns and the boys dressed up in tuxedos. We graduated from high school over at the old Seaside Ballroom, which subsequently now is condos are there now. But when it was an amusement park, they had what they call a Seaside Ballroom there. No sidewalls. It was all just a big tabernacle type of thing with the open walls. And you graduated. Well, after you graduated, then the band set up, and that was your prom night the same night. And I never will forget when we were looking forward to that night. And remember, we didn't have a car. My dad had borrowed my uncle's car. And we all went over, and Grandmother Dove went with us. And just about the time we got graduated and the band got set up, I just got on the floor with this little girl I was holding hands with in high school. She's still living, incidentally. My wife knows her. But it was never a very affectionate thing. We were just partners. And we started dancing. Mom came on the dance floor and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I hate to tell you this, Bernie," but said, "Mother's sick and we're going to have to go." Well, there's nothing left for me to do but go. So my graduation night turned out to be real zonk.
Oh, well, after all that. But you graduated at obviously when events in the world were taking a major change.
Oh, yes.
You graduated in 1940.
Yeah.
World War II broken out in 1939, the year before.
Yeah.
U.S. entered the war in 1941, the year after you graduated.
I didn't go in until early 44.
Early 44.
Yeah.
So you had a few years after you graduated.
Yeah.
During those few years, what did you do?
Well, after graduation from high school, I'd taken a civil service exam for an entrance to the Washington Navy Yard, and it was a good move because college was out of the question for us at that time. Scholarships were unheard of, and the GI Bill of Rights, I obviously wasn't eligible for that at the time. In fact, that didn't come on until I think about halfway through the war. I went up there and I stayed there for, it was 28 months. And I had two brothers. My oldest brother was drafted, one of the early inductees from Broomes Island, one of the very first. And that was in May of 1941. Then my second brother enlisted in 1942. My oldest brother enlisted in the Army, and he ended up in the infantry, and subsequently was up in Washington with the Honor Guard with the 29th Division for a period of time. He was there when the war broke out, and it wasn't long before they got them all wrapped up and bundled them up and sent them over to England, and he went with the 82nd Airborne then. My other brother was in the Air Force, and he trained in Love Airfield in Dallas, Texas, near Dallas. And from there, he went to the China, India, Burma campaign. Now, just before they left, I tried to resign the position I was in up there, and they would not let me resign because I was working on a very classified project. It was, I can say it now, but in those days it was all sworn to secrecy. And they examined you before you went out of that room, make sure you didn't take anything with you. It was a Norton bomb site. They only built 25%, built 1/4 of it there, and the other parts were built somewhere else, and it was assembled somewhere else. That's how good it was. It was good in those days. Today it's a piece of junk, probably in a museum somewhere. But I finally, after badgering the man in charge, he finally called me at the office one day, and he said, he said, I got thinking about you last night. But I told him, I said, if something happens to one of my brothers and I'm back in a deferred job, I'll never be able to live with myself. I don't want to get myself killed. I'm not looking for that. But I can't handle it. I could not handle it. So he finally agreed to let me go, and he gave me a hug when I left there. And the next day I was down the Navy recruiting office on G Street, signed up, ready to go, and then boot camp and engineering school for a few months, and then from there right overseas in the Pacific. So that's a quick thumbnail. What did you do after you graduated? Went to the Navy Yard, stayed there, enlisted in the Navy, went out, and then I took an early out. I should have had stayed in at least another year because I didn't have enough points to get out of the Navy. But if you lost a sibling, a member of your family, in the war, you were eligible for what they called an early out, because once the war was over, the war was over. And that was the end of it. And so I took the early out, which was got me back home so I could kind of help the folks out a little bit. And
so you had one brother went into the Army, one brother into the Air Force. You decided the Navy. What made you decide the Navy?
I guess it was because I spent so much time on the water.
Okay.
And I'm not sure they had a choice. I know my other brother was drafted. He was drafted, and you report to such and such a place, such and such a date for physical examination to be inducted into the Army. And but I did have a choice. I could pick and choose under the circumstances I was in.
What about your mother think that she had 3 sons?
She wasn't happy. She was not happy. Dad wasn't happy. That's one of the few times I saw him cry was when men weren't ashamed to kiss each other in those days on the side of the face. So he kissed me on the side, I kissed him on the side of the face, gave him a big hug. And of course, her mom was different. She'd hold on to you and shake like an aspen leaf, I didn't want you to go, I didn't want you to go. But we all had a job to do, and it was important that it was very important that we didn't lose that war for many obvious reasons, which you already know. Hitler was a mean demon. So was the Emperor Hirohito. They were two of a kind. Well, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the heinous way that they bombed that sneak attack, December the 7th, 1941, almost like it was inhuman.
Tell me a little bit more about your naval service. You went to boot camp, then went to training, service school, and then you went where? Where were you stationed after that?
I went to they sent me to Chicago. I left Chicago on a train and went to Shoemaker, California. I was trying to think of the name. That's why I was started. Shoemaker, California, which was a staging area for the Navy. And that's not too far from San Francisco. And then that's where I got my orders to pick my ship up at the Mare Island Navy Yard in Vallejo, California. Of course, they transported me there. And got on board the USS Instrument, and we stayed there for several weeks, getting the new camouflage on for the Pacific, because the ship had been in the North Atlantic.
What kind of ship was she?
Escort, destroyer escort. The main mission was to try to keep submarines out, to hunt submarines down, escort men and supplies into the beaches and all, just to. That was their big job. They had good sound gear and K guns on the fantail, and then the ash cans that you rolled off on a big rack. Not a big, large ship, but it was comfortable. We kind of thought, though, because if you hit a storm, you was underwater half the time. I recall one time, and I may have told the story if I have stopped me, but I recall one time we hit the tail end of a typhoon, and that old ship was going like this when you go sideways, because when you're in escort, you're zigzagging back and forth. And I was in my bunk. I had served my watch. I was in my bunk, and all of a sudden this water come gushing in. Oh my God, we've been hit, and everybody's scrambling around in it trying to get out. And what had happened was all of the below deck had scavenging air that was pulled in by air pumps. The pumps run constantly. They'd pull air in and put this fresh air down in the compartments. And what happened, the ship leaned so far, listed so far. They tell me the clinometer read 68 degrees. Now that's pretty far. And it just scooped the water up and floated down, and I really thought we'd been hit by a torpedo. I really thought we had it. I was trying to get out of there, grab my life jacket, and get out.
Well, serving on destroyer escorts, I know you have to have a strong stomach. You adapted all right to the...
I did. I did get a little bit one time in a storm, and that's the time that, I forget the name of the hangar. It wasn't too far from us, and it actually rolled the front of her deck up. That's how hard the wind blew. A number of ships were damaged. We weren't damaged because I guess most of the time we were underwater. We had a standing joke on the instrument, they ought to pay a submarine pay because we spend half our time underwater.
What position did you hold on the ship, Bernie?
I was, when I started on, I was fireman first class. And then I guess I did the right things. The old chief, Clover, he said to me one time, he said, I'm going to take you off, standard watch, your duty station. I said, I think you're a good person, and I'm not satisfied with things being run. I'm going to put you in charge. We're going to make you the oil king. That meant all the oil that was taken on when ships got fuel from the tankers, then in the islands like Saipan or Guam or wherever they were at. You had to be there to make sure that the tanks were filled properly, that you had the right ballast, Same way with water. I was oil and water kings, what they called me. And I was also the roving watch. My job was to make sure that every engineer, whether it was electrician, motor machinist mate, or machinist mate, was, when they were on duty, that they were awake. I was instructed one time that if you catch anybody asleep, you take that 45 and just lay that cold steel right against their face till they wake up. And they won't go back to sleep anymore. I never had to do that. Never had to do that. They either hear me coming or they'd be awake. But that was my job, was making sure that men in the engineering force were all on duty where they were supposed to be doing their job.
So you were on board when Japan surrendered, I presume? Right?
Yes.
Okay.
We were at Iwo Jima when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Some people say Hiroshima. We were taught to say Hiroshima. And again, I was asleep. I had a pretty rough night. We had slept, and when I woke up, I was kind of groggy. They were talking about this bomb that had killed so thousands and thousands of people, and I didn't know whose it was. I mean, is it Japan got that bomb or who? And finally, when I found out it was us, it was a sigh of relief. We were at Iwo Jima then when that happened, and then they dropped another one on Nagasaki. You remember that? Then we left. We got orders to go to Okinawa. We were on our way from Iwo Jima to Okinawa when one of the main engines blew up. And our flank speed was probably not more than 15, 18 knots at the most. And that's too slow for battle conditions. So we had orders to go back home and go back to port. Guam was our home port then. Go back to Guam, and then we got orders in between that mission going back to Guam, and we got orders to go to the island of Truk and join the other escorts there surveying that, because they expected them to surrender at any moment, and they didn't want any submarines coming in or going out there. And that's what we did. We patrolled Truk for some time. I've got the last battle orders that was issued around. I got a copy of them. The captain issued orders. He wanted everybody at GQ, General Quarters, and wanted all guns unmuzzled, magazines in place, loaded magazines in place, and stand by. I still don't trust these damn jets. Everybody, they had 40 mils, we had 350s on, and everybody was at their station. I was at mine. I was on the K gun, incidentally. That's the one that it's a two-man operation. You put the ash can up in this thing shaped like a K, set it in there. Then you have to open the breech, put a projectile in and slam it shut. Then you take a lanyard and stand back and pull it. That fires a projectile, and that shoots the ash can off. It's all computerized now. Seamen do it all now. Officers are there to keep everything straight, but most of you seamen are in the war room, handle everything.
For a young man your age, you born and raised up in a very isolated part of the country in Calvert County, and then all of a sudden you're with the Navy, you're traveling to California, you're going to different places in the Pacific. It must have been quite a eye-opener in many ways.
Oh yeah, well, when I left, and I have never told this story to too many people, but when I left, I really got word. I think we were at Saipan at the time, and I got word, through the system they had, that my oldest brother had died in action, and then I kind of lost it to a certain extent. I loved that guy. I loved him. He was a good-looking man and a good person. 26 years of age is much too young to get slaughtered because of a crazy war. And at that point in my life, I kind of lost my stability. And I said, I don't care whether I live or die. I don't care if a kamikaze drops on this pig iron ship. I don't care what happens. And after I come to my senses, maybe a week or so later, I got thinking, well, thank God, that you've been merciful. You ignored me. And then I really wanted to get home because I got thinking about Mom and Dad, the blows they were taking. Because Dad was a very sensitive person. He was rough and gruff, but something wrong with him with his kids. I mean, he could break down in a hurry. And so my desire then was to be cool, play it safe, do the best you can to make sure that you could get back to your parents. That was my ambition, my desire, my love, and expectations at that time. But it wasn't always like that.
You were discharged in 1945, later in 45?
I was discharged in May of 1946.
46, okay. And you came back to Broomes Island?
Came back to Broomes Island and spent a little time with the folks, kind of recuperating. Incidentally, when we came back to the States, to show you how appreciative America was in those days, we our division landed at Long Beach, California. And they had a band playing. They had a big sign, I mean a huge banner up there. Good job, well done. All these girls and all from the USO was throwing these little cartons of milk. So you don't get any fresh milk over there. There's no cows aboard ship. It's all powdered milk. And they were throwing this out to us, you know. Fortunately, we had an ice cream maker aboard ship. They called that guidon. In the Navy, you call ice cream guidon. Candy is pogey bait. And so we had the guidon machine, and we could get soft ice cream every so often. Whenever the captain wanted to give us a little bonus for being good boys, he'd let them fire up the ice cream machine. But it was such a warm feeling to see that sign, to hear those bands, to see all of these, because we hadn't seen anything but, you know, if you went ashore on Guam or somewhere, you'd see the Islanders, but you hadn't seen any Americans. We came back, we brought 59 Marines back from Iwo Jima that were pretty war-weary, and some of them had mild wounds. They were nothing critical, because if they'd been critical, they'd have carried them another way. But we brought them back to the hospital ship in Guam, and we saw them nurses on that hospital ship. My God, I thought they were the prettiest things in the world. Then when you get back to the United States, and you really see some good-looking girls, what was I thinking about? You know? I hope you don't put all this in a movie. Streamline it, if you will. These are sea stories now, Mike.
There'll be some editing, I know. You came back to Broomes Island.
Yep.
We're going to finish up here soon, Bernie, but you came back to Broomes Island. It wasn't like long after that that you started a business there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the business that you started?
When I got discharged, I was discharged in Bainbridge, Maryland, and they wanted to keep me because I had an injury to my ear, and they wanted to keep me and see if they could. And also, I had ruptured myself on a K-gun one time at GQ when the guy with me, he slipped, he lost his balance and fell, and I had the whole weight of that thing. And I felt something snap down here. And, of course, you do your job, you do what you can do. But they caught both of that. They caught the hearing in the left ear. There was, we were at GQ. It was 3.5-inch gun. And I was close to the gun. The K gun wasn't too far from the 3.5-inch gun. You had three of them aboard. One there, one up amidships, and you had one on the forecastle. And they had fired the gun so long, the breech was hot. And when they gave orders through the phones, computers didn't cut them off, through the phones, when they opened the breech, they slammed another one in, and that was in, and they ceased firing, that was in. I took my battle muffs off, and wasn't only seconds later that thing went off. And my head for weeks felt like it was this big around. I couldn't hear. My head was ringing and everything. And, you know, there's nothing serious, nothing like threatening. I didn't even complain about it. Of course, the medics knew it and all. And they caught it over at Bainbridge and wanted to keep me there. I said, no, I want to get home. I want to see my mother and father, my friends. I really want to go home. I'll get it taken care of. Well, that let the Navy off the hook, so I came on home. Stayed with Mom and Dad for a little while, and then I went back to my old station which they had to give me my place back in Washington. But it was a different world then. The conduct and the atmosphere in Washington had changed so drastically. You know, there was high incident of crime at that time and all, and it just it kind of took away the hunger I had for living in Washington, because that is a beautiful city, and it was so nice then. We'd go to the concerts 3 nights a week at the Capitol. You know, didn't have money to go anywhere else. Anyway, I finally went to the head man and told him again. I said, I'm going to have to leave you. I can't stand the city. I want to go back to the country. Because I had dreams overseas of opening up this boat rental place. Another guy from Baltimore, who's a very dear friend of mine, he's still living, Bob Rigger, he and I used to talk all the time. And he said, what are you going to name it? I said, well, I've been thinking about Bernie's Boats, Bernie's Better Boats, Bernie's Boat Basin. He said, I like Bernie's Boats. I like that. So that's where we ended up naming the little place down there. But I did come back home, and I had some money I'd saved before I went into service. I had some money that I'd saved while overseas because there's no place to spend it. And went to the bank to borrow some money. And the president of the bank at that time took my application and all, and kind of patted me on the back like didn't think there'd be any problems. Then I got, my mother got a call telling me they had denied the loan. It was a loan, GI loan, for $10,000. Could be unsecured. The federal government stood behind that money. The bank would never lose a dime on him. But in those days, they had just a handful of directors, and they had them strategically located geographically in the county. And they pretty much called the shot. You know, Bernie Fowler's name came up for $4,000, and it went down. So when I came out of the bank, I ran into Louis Goldstein, who was starting his run for the Senate. He was in the House of Delegates. Louis was in the House of Delegates and was, left the House of Delegates to go in the Marine Corps in World War II, and he served very admirably. Good man. And he said, always called me Young Mr. Fowler. Young Mr. Fowler, how you doing? Pretty good. Well, we all got back all right. Yes, sir, we sure did. And he said, what are you up in town for today? And I said, well, I went in to get some money from the bank, but I've been refused under the GI loan. He said, what do you mean you're refused? I said, they can't refuse you. I said, well, they did. They wouldn't loan me the money. I'm going back in with you. So we went back in the bank. He got a hold of Claude Owens was president of the bank then. And he, you know how Louis, he had a gift of gab. He could make you think black was white. He was a very honest man. I don't mean anything detrimental about it, but he went in and he jumped all over the bank president. This boy's been overseas fighting for the country. Another brother, and the one brother he lost over service. You turning him down? Said, I'm going to loan him the money myself. Said, I'll loan him the money myself. This boy deserves it. When I got home, the bank had called and told me my loan had been approved. So he called me a little later and wanted to know if I had affiliated yet. No, I said, I really haven't given much thought to it yet. He said, well, I know your mom and dad are both Republicans, but if you would affiliate as a Democrat, just to get me through the primary election. Once I get through the primary, I'll be okay. And I looked at him and I said, Louis, I'll have to talk to my dad, but I'm sure I'll do that. I owe you one. So I said to Dad, he said, son, there's two things that I've never badgered you about. Your religion and your politics. That's very personal. That's your choice. You make that choice yourself. So that's why I'm a Democrat.
I never knew that. So you launched Bernie's Boats in, I think, 1947?
Yeah, back 47, yeah.
How did things go? How did business go?
It went pretty good because, remember, I'm single, and all I owed was the money that I had borrowed from the bank, the $4,000 GI loan that I borrowed from the bank. So it was going good, and of course, as you know, in those days, slot machines were legal in southern Maryland, and I wasn't open 2 or 3 days until I had one of the agents or whatever you call them, brokers, whoever owned the slot machines anyway, came over and wanted to know if I wanted to put some slot machines in, so you get 50% of the take. I said, sure, go ahead. Not thinking anything about it, but I regret that I did that because I had some experiences with that later that kind of pricked my conscience. Had one man in particular that was kind of addicted to playing the slot machines. And he came in one day and he $20 worth of quarters and put them in, $20 worth of quarters, put those in. He did $60 worth of quarters. That was all the money he had. Then he came to me and said, want to buy a rowboat? And I said, oh, I'm interested in buying rowboats, yeah. I said, who's got it? He said, I have. I said, where's it at? He said, one there on the pier. I said, it's a brand new one you just built. He said, I'm going to sell it. If you don't buy it, I'm going to sell it to somebody else. What do you want for it? $60. So I rang the register, gave him $60. And he come back, $20 worth of quarters. I'm ahead of my story. He came up to me, to get it straight, he came up to me and said, no, he put that money in the slot machine. Now that's $120. If he had won it, he only got $25. That's his max. That's how bad it was. And then he came up to me, scratched his head, and he said, would you do me a favor? And I said, if I can, I will. He said, would you loan me $20? I said, yes, sir, I will. I loaned $20. I said, I'm going to loan you this, provided you don't go to that slot machine to put it out there. He looked at me and he told me where I could go. He never came back in my place after that. But that bothered me because there was people, and there are today, that's so addicted to those slot machines and to gambling. It creates domestic problems. It creates all kind of hardships for families who can't afford it. And I just think it's inherently wrong for the state of Maryland or any government to perpetuate gambling as a source of revenue to provide public service. I think it's wrong. I experienced it. I know it's wrong in my heart. And one of the things that kind of divided the governor and I a little bit was his big push for the casinos all in Maryland and everything. I just think it's wrong. But anyhow, we're getting off track here now. A little bit. He'll edit it all, so it will make no difference.
But how long did you have the slot machines then?
I had them until I sold the place. I opened the place in 47, sold the place, and I believe it was 57, 10 years. See, after I got married, it was a 7-day-a-week operation. Of course, the winters I had vacation, but it was a 7-day-a-week operation. And by that time, I had met my sweet wife, and we'd gotten married. We'd had our first child a year later, and the second child 2 years later. And so I just decided when I'd send him off to Sunday school and church, it didn't seem right. Sunday was my busiest day. And I just finally decided I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to get them in an environment. They'll be going to school before too long. And this just is not going to work for me. I loved it down there, don't get me wrong. I loved it down on that beach. So then I sold it in 57 and tried to buy a piece of land on several occasions at Broomes Island, up the creek there on the high land. And I couldn't get the land, so I ended up becoming a resident of the Dares Beach area. And been here ever since.
You jumped into my last question, which was, how did you meet Betty? And
that was a very pleasant experience. Her mother and father, they were from Washington, D.C. She was born in Durham, North Carolina. Her mother was born in Georgia. Her father was born in Georgia. And they got married, and they moved to Durham, North Carolina, and I guess a couple of kids was born there, as was Betty. And then later on, they moved to Washington, D.C. For whatever the reason. I think she had brothers up there, and came to Washington, D.C. But how I met her was her mother and father were two of the best customers I had. Every Sunday afternoon, they came and went fishing. They'd rent the boats and play the slot machines. Her mother loved to play the slot machines, and they'd get crab cakes and stuff. They were really good customers. And when she'd come back in, I didn't have a public telephone. My phone was in a little apartment in the lunchroom. So I would, she'd come in, she'd say, "Bernie, may I use your phone? I want to call my daughter. I said, "Oh, sure." So I'd unlock the little apartment. She'd go and use the phone, come back. And this went on for a whole summer almost. And then in September, I believe it was, they came down fishing, and it was on my wife's birthday. No, it was October. It was the fall fishing. It was October because her birthday is October the 3rd. And I was taking those days you bought all of your, there was no throwaways. You bought all glass bottles, and you had to pay 2 cents deposit on them, so you're careful to make sure they got back in the crates, and you got your credit for them when your distributors came in to refill them. And I was going at the back door piling all these Cokes up and the orangeade and the other stuff that I had. And this blue Oldsmobile, which her father owned, drove up, and this lady hollered at me and said, "Bernie, you got a minute?" And I said, "Well, I'll take it." I was so tired. I'd been up all Thursday night, all Friday night, all Saturday night, on my last leg. And so I went over to the car and she said, "I want you to meet my daughter." And she stepped out of the car. I said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know Liz Taylor was coming here to tell you." She was so pretty. And 65 years later, here we are, still traveling that road. That's how I met her. But it was a very, I don't know, sometimes when I haven't been too kind to God, he's always been kind to me. He's never lost his love for me. And southeaster came up, flood tide in the southeaster. Well, it gets pretty choppy in Patuxent with that. And I knew they couldn't go to a small boat. So I told them, I said, "You're not going to be able to fish in the rowboats today." And, "Oh my gosh, well, I'm disappointed." "You really think it's that rough?" I said, "I know it's that rough, Captain. I'm telling you, I've been here a long time. I can tell you, I'm not going out today." So then I got thinking, well, you know, Dad's boat's here, his party boat. I'll see if they want me to take them out. So I was thinking, and I suggested to him, I said, "You know, Dad's boat's here. I use it all the time. If you all really want to go fishing, I'll take you out in the big boat. But I won't let you go out in a small boat tonight." So they were overjoyed with that. Well, that was love at first sight. We got acquainted that night, and every weekend she'd come down to go fishing. They'd go fishing. We'd stay and had a jukebox. We'd dance. All the kids would come down with us, you know. And that's how I met her. And about a year and a half later, we were hitched. We proposed, and the first time she turned me down, and then later she said to me, "You know, if you asked me the questions you asked me some time ago, my answer today would be yes." That's wonderful. And that's what we did.
Well, that's a good way to end, I think.
There you go.
Let me just ask a couple of quick things. At Bernie's boats, besides renting your boats, and you had the slot machines, did you have a restaurant there?
Yeah, it was all in one.
What was it? Just describe everything that was there.
Well, it was not too large. It wasn't too large. The building wasn't too large. And we had booze in there. Had every, you know, like you'd have in a regular lunchroom. And it had a counter, and the cooktop and all was all visible. You could watch the crab cakes, the hamburgers being cooked and everything. We never sold any booze. 2 things I decided I never wanted to do in life. I didn't want to sell booze, and I didn't want to be a politician. I reneged on the second one, but I never reneged on the first one. I've saw booze destroy too many families at Broomes Island in my young days. Anyway, it was really cozy there. And as business picked up, I had my mother working for me, I had my brother working for me down there, take care of the boats and all. And we were doing all right. But the slot machines I could give the food. We'd make a pure hamburger. Crab cakes. This is crabs out of the caught. This is Patuxent River crabs, nice fat crabs. All crab meat, no stuffing in there. I'd sold a crab cake with a slice of tomato and a piece of lettuce on it and a handful of potato chips, 35 cents. And we made money on it, but the idea was to get people in there so that they would work the slot machines, because the slot machines was all clear money and easy way, but not a proper way, not
That
a
was-
proper way.
That was more profitable than the boats and the
Oh, yeah.
food.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd take in a pretty good piece of change. Washingtonians got down there, man, playing them slot machines. They didn't know when to stop.
Now, nowhere in our interviews have we mentioned how you lost your fingers.
I'm sorry? Oh, the fingers?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that was an accident. This didn't happen during the war.
No, but
No.
we haven't mentioned that anywhere in any of the interviews.
Yeah, it was. I was making a door frame for my father's boat. The second boat he had, the pilot house was so wide it had a window in it, and it was too hard for him to get the pole out the window to fish. And he loved to fish with the people that he fished with, the parties. So he asked me if there was any way I could cut a hole in the side and put it. I said, sure, I'll do it. So I used a table saw to do that, and the table saw was dull, and got a little rambunctious, and the next thing you know, I'm two fingers short. That's how it happened.
How old were you when that happened?
How old? That was 1954, about 54. I think I'm right on that.
So 30 years
Some
old.
things I don't quite remember, the exact dates. About 1954.
And one other just follow-up question. When you were working at the Navy Yard, what were you working as? What were you doing? I didn't quite understand.
I was learning to be a machinist.
Machinist.
Yeah, run all kind of equipment that makes metal things, and of course they build guns there, and the gun sight and all that stuff. So you got good experience, but you spend half the time in the shop working and half the time in school, learning to read blueprints, learning how to draw the blueprints, and all kind of stuff. I had to go to a night school up there to keep from flunking out, because I didn't have strong geometry background. I went to junior high school, Hines Junior High School at nighttime, so I wouldn't flunk out of the class. I didn't have geometry 2, and I needed it.
Now, you had the GI Bill, and you've since got the honorary degrees from colleges. Why didn't you think about going back after college?
Well, after I'd spent my time overseas and I got home, I loved it so well. I loved the river so well. It just, it never come down as a necessary thing. I figured, well, I'm going to make money in business. Why do I need to go to college, And I went to University of Maryland for 2 semesters and took courses because I had planned on maybe taking a school teaching job, and all I needed with the experience I had, all I needed was 18 semester hours to be certified as a teacher. And I think I've got the report cards around. I did real good the time that I went. And again, that was mostly, drawings and stuff that... It was nobody's fault but mine that I didn't get a college education after the war.
I think you've done quite well without it.
That's all.
Yes.